Hi, and welcome back to the Inner Archive. This is Chapter 7, the final chapter of An Outline of Occult Science by Rudolf Steiner. Details from the Domain of Occult Science. In this final chapter of An Outline of Occult Science, Steiner turns to a series of more detailed explorations within the spiritual world. After laying out the larger picture, cosmic evolution, the development of the human being, and the path to higher knowledge, he now focuses in more closely on some specific realities. The etheric body, the nature of dreams, the experiences of life after death, the astral world, and the higher regions of spiritual existence. These are not presented as abstract theories, but as descriptions meant to deepen and clarify what's already been introduced earlier in the book and to sort of tie it all together. So in this chapter, we move into more particular observations, details that help round out the broad framework of occult science. With that, we will now begin Chapter 7, Details from the Domain of Occult Science. All right, let's begin. When the higher principles of man are observed with clairvoyant vision, the mode of perception is never precisely the same as that which comes from the outer senses. If we touch an object and experience a sensation of warmth, we must distinguish between that which comes from the object, that which, as it were, streams out from it, and our own psychic experience. The inner psychic experience of perceiving warmth is something distinct from the heat which streams from the object. Now, let us imagine this psychic experience quite by itself without the outer object. Let us call up the experience of a sensation of heat in our soul without the presence of any external physical object to cause it. If such a sensation simply existed without cause, it would be mere fancy. The student of occult science experiences such inner perceptions without any physical cause. But at a certain stage of development, they present themselves in such a manner that he knows, it has been shown that by the very nature of that experience he can know, that the inner perception is not fancy, but is caused by a psycho-spiritual being belonging to a supersensible world, just as the ordinary sensation of heat, for example, is caused by an external physical sense object. It is the same with the perception of color in the supersensible world. Here we must distinguish between the color associated with the outer object and the inner color sensation in the soul. Let us call up the soul's inner sensation when it perceives a red object in the physical outer world of the senses. Let us imagine that we retain a very vivid recollection of the impression, but that we are looking away from the object. Let us imagine what we still retain as a memory picture of the color to be an inner experience. We shall then distinguish between that which is an inner experience of the color and the external color itself. These inner experiences differ entirely in their content from impressions of the outer senses. They bear much more the impress of what is felt as joy and sorrow than that of normal physical sensation. Now, let us imagine an inner experience of this kind arising in the soul without any suggestion from an outer sense object. A clairvoyant may have an experience of this kind, and may know, too, in that case, that it is no fancy, but the expression of a psycho-spiritual being. Now, if this psycho-spiritual being excites the same impression as does a red object of the physical sense world, then that being is red. There will, however, always be the external impression first, and then the inner experience of color in the case of the physical sense object. In that of the genuine clairvoyance of a man of today, it must be the contrary. First, the inner experience, shadowy, like a mere recollection of color, and then a picture, growing more and more vivid. The less heed we pay to this necessary sequence of events, the less we are able to distinguish between actual spiritual perception and the delusions of fancy, that is, illusion, hallucination, etc. The vividness of the picture in a psycho-spiritual perception of this kind, Whether it remains quite shadowy, like a dim concept, or whether it impresses us as intensively as an outer object, depends altogether upon the clairvoyant stage of development. Now, the general impression obtained by the clairvoyant of the etheric body may thus be described. When the clairvoyant has strengthened his willpower to such a degree that, in spite of the fact that an individual stands before him in a physical body, he can abstract his attention from what the physical eye sees, he is then able to see clairvoyantly into the space occupied by the man's physical body. Of course, a great increase of willpower is necessary in order to withdraw the attention not only from something in the mind, but from something standing before one in such a way that the physical impression is quite extinguished. But this increase of will is possible and is brought about by exercises for the attainment of supersensible cognition. The clairvoyant can then first have a general impression of the etheric body. Within his soul there arises the same inner sensation which he has, let us say, at the sight of a peach blossom. Then this becomes vivid, so that he is able to say that the etheric body has the color of peach blossoms. He next perceives the separate organs and currents of the etheric body. A further description of the etheric body may be given by relating the psychic experiences which correspond to sensations of heat or of sound impressions, etc., for this etheric body is not merely a color phenomenon. The astral body and the other principles of the human being may also be described in like manner. He who takes this into consideration will understand just how descriptions should be taken which are given by occult science. The astral world. As long as we observe the physical world only, the earth, as man's dwelling place, appears like a separate cosmic body. But when supersensible cognition rises to higher spheres, this separation ceases. Thus, one can say that the imagination, when beholding the earth, at the same time also perceives the moon condition as it has developed up to the present time. Now, that world which is entered in this way is one to which not only the supersensible part of Earth belongs, but is one in which also other cosmic bodies are embedded, which in a physical sense are entirely separate from the Earth. Therefore, the observer of supersensible worlds thus beholds not only the supersensible part of the Earth, but also the supersensible part of other cosmic beings. If one should be impelled to ask why clairvoyants do not describe the appearance of Mars, etc., he should bear in mind that it is primarily a question of observing supersensible conditions of other planetary bodies, whereas the questioner is thinking of physical sense conditions. Therefore, in this work, it was possible to speak of certain relations of the Earth's evolution to the simultaneous evolution on Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, etc. Now, when the human astral body has been drawn away by sleep, it belongs not only to the Earth, but to worlds of which still other regions of the universe are a part, that is, stellar worlds. Indeed, these worlds extend their influence to man's astral body even when he is awake. For this reason, the name astral body appears to be justified. Of man's life after death. Mention has been made in the course of this book of the time during which the astral body still remains joined to the etheric body of man after death. During this time, there exists a slowly paling recollection of the whole earth life just ended. The duration of this time varies in different individuals. It depends upon the strength with which the astral body clings to the etheric body, on the power which the former has over the latter. Supersensible cognition can gain an idea of this power by observing a person who, judging from his degree of fatigue, must of necessity fall asleep, but, by sheer inner force, keeps awake. It then appears that different people can keep awake for different lengths of time without being overpowered by sleep. The memory of the past life, in other words, the connection with the etheric body, lasts about as long after death as the length of time a man can keep awake when, in the most extreme case, he is compelled to. When the etheric body is detached from the individual after death, something of it nevertheless remains for man's whole subsequent development. This may be described as an extract, or the essence of it. This extract contains the result of the past life, and is the vehicle of all that which, during man's spiritual development between death and a new birth, unfolds like a germ for the following life. The duration of time between death and a new birth is determined by the fact that the ego, as a rule, returns to the physical sense world only when that world has been so transformed that the ego can experience something new. During its sojourn in spiritual regions, its dwelling place on earth undergoes a change. But this change is connected with the great changes in the universe, with changes in the constellation of the Earth, Sun, and so forth. These are changes in which certain repetitions take place in connection with new conditions. They find an external impression in the fact, for example, that the point in the vault of heaven at which the sun rises at the beginning of spring makes a complete circuit in the course of about 26,000 years. Hence, this vernal point, in the course of the period mentions, moves from one region of the heavens to another. In the course of the 12th part of that time, that is to say, in about 2100 years, conditions on the earth have changed sufficiently for the human soul to experience something new upon it since its previous incarnation. However, since the experiences of an individual vary according to whether he is incarnated as a woman or as a man, there are, as a rule, 2 incarnations within the time stated, one as a man and one as a woman. But these things are also dependent upon the nature of the forces which man carries with him from his earthly existence through death. Therefore, all the statements given here are to be taken only in a general sense, but can be subject to the greatest variations in special cases. The course of human life. Man's life, as it manifests itself in the sequence of events between birth and death, can be fully understood only by taking into account both the physical body with its senses and the changes undergone by man's supersensible principles. Occult science views those changes in the following manner. Physical birth is seen to be the detachment of the human being from its maternal covering. Forces which before birth the embryo shared in common with its mother's body are present independently in the child after birth. But in later life, supersensible events, similar to those of the sense world at physical birth, become perceptible to supersensible observation. That is, the etheric body of the human being, up to the change of teeth, is still enveloped in an etheric sheath. That is, around the 6th or 7th year. The etheric sheath falls away at that period, and then the birth of the etheric body occurs. But man is still surrounded by an astral sheath, which falls away between its 12th and 16th year at the time of puberty. This is the birth of the astral body, and at a still later period, the real ego is born. Now, after the birth of the ego, man lives in such a way that he adapts himself to the conditions of the world and of life, and occupies himself within them in accordance with the principles active through his ego, the sentient, the intellectual, and the consciousness soul. Then there comes a time in which the etheric body retraces the process of its development from the 7th year onward in reverse order. At first, the astral body has so developed itself that it unfolds that which was present within it at birth as a germ. After the birth of the ego, this astral body enriches itself by experiencing the outer world. Finally, at a definite time, it begins to nourish itself spiritually by consuming its own etheric body. It actually lives upon the etheric body. The decay of the physical body in old age is a consequence of this. The course of human life therefore falls into 3 divisions: a time of unfoldment for the physical and etheric bodies, then one in which the astral body and the ego develop, and lastly, that in which the etheric and physical bodies are changed back again. But the astral body plays a part in all the events that take place between birth and death. Since it is really born in a spiritual sense only between the 12th and 16th years and must, during man's declining years, draw upon the forces of the etheric and physical bodies, that which it is able to perform by its own powers will develop more slowly than if it were not within a physical and an etheric body. After death, when the physical and etheric bodies have fallen away, evolution, during the time of purification, proceeds in such a manner that it occupies about 1/3 of the duration of life between birth and death. The higher regions of the spiritual world. By imagination, inspiration, and intuition, supersensible cognition gradually ascends into those regions of the spiritual world within which it can reach the beings who have to do with human and cosmic evolution. And thus it also becomes possible to trace human evolution between death and a new birth in such a way that it becomes comprehensible. Now, there are still higher regions of existence, which can only be briefly indicated here. When supersensible cognition has risen to intuition, it lives in a world of spiritual beings. These too are evolving. That which concerns humanity of the present day extends upward in a certain sense, as far as the world of intuition. True, man receives impulses from yet higher worlds in the course of his evolution between death and rebirth, but he does not experience these impulses directly. They are brought to him by beings belonging to the spiritual world, and if these are considered, everything that happens reveals itself to man. But the special conditions of these beings, that which they themselves require in order to guide human evolution, can only be observed by means of a cognition that transcends intuition. We thus have a glimpse of worlds which we must so picture that within them the most highly spiritual features of the earth are there among the lowest. Logical decisions, for example, count among the highest things within the earthly sphere, while the activities of the mineral kingdom are among the lowest. Now, in those higher spheres, logical decisions correspond to about what the mineral activities are on Earth. Above the domain of intuition lies the region in which the cosmic plan is woven out of spiritual causes. The principles of man. When it is said that the ego works on the human principles, on the physical, etheric, and astral bodies, and transforms them in reverse order into spirit self, life spirit, and spirit man, this statement relates to the work of the ego on the human being by means of the highest faculties, the development of which was begun only under earthly conditions. But this transformation is preceded at a lower level by another change, giving rise to the sentient, the intellectual or rational, and the consciousness soul. For while, in the course of human evolution, the sentient soul is being formed, changes are taking place in the astral body. The growth of the intellectual soul expresses itself in transformations in the etheric body, and that of the consciousness soul in similar transformations in the physical body. Fuller information on this subject has been given in the book in the accounts of the evolution of the earth. Thus, in a certain sense, we may say that the sentient soul itself is the result of a transformed astral body, the intellectual or rational soul of a transformed etheric body, and the consciousness soul of a transformed physical body. But we may also say that these three divisions of the soul are parts of the astral body. For example, the consciousness soul is only possible because it is an astral entity existing in a physical body suited to it. It lives an astral life within a physical body fashioned to be its dwelling place. The dream state. A description of the dream state has been given in another chapter of this book. On the one hand, it is to be regarded as a relic of the old picture consciousness peculiar to man during the moon evolution, and also during a great part of the evolution of the Earth. Evolution goes forward in such a way that earlier conditions resolve themselves into later ones. And so, in the dream state, there now appears in man a relic of what was once his normal condition. But at the same time, this condition from another aspect is different from the old picture consciousness. For since its development, the ego also has taken part in those activities of the astral body which are carried on during sleep in the dream life. Thus, through the presence of the ego, there arises in dreams a transformed picture consciousness. But since the ego does not consciously exercise its authority over the astral body during dream life, nothing belonging to the sphere of that life can be regarded as being really able to lead to a knowledge of higher worlds in an occult sense. Something similar holds good with regard to what is often called vision, premonition, or quote-unquote second sight. These arise through silencing the ego and the consequent appearance of remnants of the old condition of consciousness. In spiritual science, these are of no value. What may be observed in them cannot in any real sense be regarded as a result of it. The attainment of supersensible knowledge. The path to the attainment of knowledge of the higher worlds, which has been more fully described in this book, may also be called the direct path of knowledge. In addition to this path, there is another, which we may designate as the path of feeling. It would be quite a mistake, however, to believe that the former had nothing to do with the development of feeling. On the contrary, it leads to the greatest possible deepening of the life of feeling. But the path of feeling addresses itself directly and solely to the feelings, and seeks from this point to rise to knowledge. It rests on the fact that when the soul entirely surrenders itself to a feeling for a certain length of time, the latter is transformed into knowledge, into imaginative perception. When, for example, the soul is filled for weeks or months or even longer with the feeling of humility, the content of the feeling becomes transformed into a perception. Now, a path leading to supersensible regions may be found by devoting oneself to such feelings one by one. But for the man of today, bound by the ordinary circumstances of life, this is not easily carried out. Solitude, retirement from the life of the present day, is almost indispensable. For the impressions of everyday life disturb the soul, especially at the beginning of development, through absorption in certain feelings. On the other hand, the path of knowledge described in this book can be pursued in every situation of present-day life. Observation of special events and beings in the spiritual world. The question may be asked whether inner concentration and the other means described for the attainment of supersensible cognition permit us to observe only in a general way what happens between death and a new birth or other spiritual events, or whether they furnish the possibility of observing quite definite events and beings, as, for example, any given deceased person. To this, we must answer that one who has acquired the ability to see in the spiritual world by the methods explained can also perceive particular events which occur there. He acquires the power of putting himself in communication with individuals living in the spiritual world between death and a new birth. It must be observed, however, that in an occult sense, this ought to take place only after the proper training required for supersensible cognition has been undergone. For not until then is it possible to distinguish between illusion and reality in regard to certain events and beings. A man who tries to observe particular cases without due instruction may fall a victim to innumerable deceptions. The training which leads to the observation in higher worlds of what has been described in this book also leads to the ability to trace the postmortem life of any specific individual and no less does it lead to the observation and comprehension of all psycho-spiritual beings who, from the hidden worlds, work upon the visible ones. Correct observation of individual cases is only possible, however, on the basis of a knowledge of the universal great facts of the spiritual world. Facts regarding the world and humanity which concern every human being. The desire for the one without the other leads into error. And that brings us to the end of an outline of occult science. If you've listened to even a bit of this book, you know that it's not a light one. It asks for patience, reflection, and often a willingness to sit with ideas that really stretch the mind. But if you've listened through the whole work, you've moved through a complete spiritual cosmology, from the origins of the cosmos, through human evolution, to the development of higher knowledge, and finally to the place of spiritual science in modern life. Whether one agrees with every detail or not, or believes every detail or not, Steiner's intention is clear: to offer a path of understanding that unites spiritual insight with clarity of thought. If this series has been helpful to you, you might consider revisiting earlier chapters over time. These ideas often unfold differently on a second or third encounter. Thanks so much for listening and for taking the time to explore this deep work so thoughtfully with me.